class. Today, Mrs. Boyd Live has a special guest. It's my son, Dalton, a senior at Yale. And one of the things he has done his entire high school and college career is debated. He's the best person to teach you about what opinion essays, persuasive essays, and arguments really are. I hope you really follow along with him. Pause the show, rewind the show, stop the show, take the notes, write everything down so that you understand how to form an amazing essay. And later on, he'll show you how to turn that essay into a speech in a second video. So enjoy the show.
Hey everybody, I'm Dalton. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the structure of an argument and some common tips for how to best write an argumentative essay. And then later on, I'll be talking about public speaking. Shout out to Abdul for asking for that content. To get started off, when we think of argument, it's really important for us to have structure in the way that we're writing. Unlike other types of writing, when you're making an argument, you need to do a certain set of things to convince your audience that you're correct. And one of the easiest ways to boil this down to is every different claim you make should have this structure, which is you want the claim, which is what you think, what your argument is, your warrant, which is why you're right about what you think, and then your impact, which is why your audience should actually care about what you're arguing about. The claim has a couple of requirements in and of itself, though. You don't want your claim to be something that's just a fact, because then there's nothing up for debate. There's no argument to be had. If my claim is that grass is green, then I guess sometimes it's brown, but there's not really much of a debate to be had there. It's not really productive for me to have that conversation at all. So you want your claim to be something that your audience might disagree with, or that some people disagree with somewhere. Your warrant then needs to be really good, because it's how you're convincing your audience that what you want to say is correct. You could have two types of warrants, and in any argument, you want to use one or both of these. One type would be if I'm using data itself to affirm the fact that I've claimed. Oftentimes, your warrant itself will require data to back it up. So if I'm saying that seatbelts are important because they keep you safe, I'll need some evidence to prove that seatbelts really do keep you safe. And so I might want to use a study that found that seatbelts make it 20% less likely that you get injured in the case of a car crash. That's my warrant, my evidence, or why I think I'm right. But there's also times when you don't need evidence at all, and you just want to use your own logic to convince the audience that you're right. I'm sorry I don't have a much more simple example, but if I'm trying to say that I think there should be a carbon tax or a price on carbon emissions, my warrant might be that I'm going to be changing the incentives of people who might be emitting by putting a cost on admission, which means they're less likely to do it. I don't have any evidence there, but I've made a claim and supported it with logical reasoning that makes my claim true. The impact is also important. That's when you tell your audience why they should care at all about what you're saying. If I'm just trying to argue with you over something that the audience doesn't care about, they're not going to pay attention to your writing. It's possible that the impact is going to be going back to affirming your main argument. For example, if you're writing a full essay out and you're talking about one specific example, your impact might be how that specific example relates to the argument that you're trying to prove further above. Right now, I want to walk you through an example of how to build an argument using some good examples and also some common mistakes that people make when they're trying to write arguments out. So we're going to go over here where I've written out two choices for each of the three steps. So we start off with our claim, or what we think is true. Remember, we want this to be specific and we want this to be debatable. The first one, I say many people have cats. The second one, I say cats are easier to take care of than dogs. Which one do you think would be a good claim? Number one or number two? Number two, right? Number one is incredibly vague. I'm not specific at all. And it's not debatable. It's true that many people have cats. There's no argument to be had there, so it's kind of pointless for me to say it at all. It's really common for us to make a mistake here and be super vague. It is a debate on whether or not people like cats. I could say people should like cats, but that's a little too vague. I'm not telling you why. I'm not making any specific argument besides that people should like cats in general. This is much better because I'm being specific. Cats are easier to take care of than dogs. There's a clear division, cats versus dogs, and a clear metric, which is easier to take care of. Now let's move on to the warrant, or how I prove this claim to be true. The first option, I say, cats don't need to be walked and generally require less attention, so less time needs to be spent worrying about them. The second option, I say, dogs are needy, and I don't really like their floppy ears. I once had a dog who tore up all of our furniture. That's true facts. Which one do we think is better? Number 1 or number 2? This time it's number 1, right? Number 2 is super off topic. I start off by talking about dogs, but remember operatively, I'm trying to prove that cats are easier to take care of than dogs, not that dogs are harder to take care of than cats. It might seem like a small difference here, but in some arguments you can get way off topic by talking about the wrong thing, so you want to avoid doing that altogether. I also add an unnecessary piece of information. I don't like their floppy ears. That has nothing to do with whether cats are easier to take care of than dogs. That's a personal preference that I, to be fair, don't have about dogs. And the last sentence, I once had a dog who tore up all of our furniture. It's a good example, and it could honestly be used as part of an effective argument to prove that dogs might be difficult to take care of. But there's 2 problems with this. The first is that I make a claim about a dog based off of a specific experience, and I'm trying to apply it to a general claim. If I'm making a generalized claim, then I need to have general evidence to back it up. If I want to talk specifically about dogs being difficult to take care of, I could say that dogs oftentimes are more hyper and destroy things. In fact, I have a specific experience that I can offer as evidence, but you don't want that to be your whole warrant. Number 1 is good, because I'm able to talk about a specific fact about cats. They don't need to be walked. They kind of mind their own business, and generally require less attention. This could be more specific. I'm making a fairly generic claim. I could clarify that a bit better if I wanted my essay to be more effective. And then I say, so less time needs to be spent worrying about them. That's an important part of the warrant, because I'm explaining why my evidence actually supports my claim to begin with. Let's move on to impact now. I have 2 options again. The first is, if you spend less time taking care of your pet, you have more time to spend on other things, like spending time with your family or playing video games. And my second option is, everybody should have a cat because they are less work. Which one do we think is better here? Number 1 or number 2? It's number 1 again. Number 2 isn't terrible. The problem is, I'm just repeating my claim. I'm not giving my audience any reason to care about my claim. I'm just summarizing the fact that I've proven it. What we want to do with our impact is make our audience care about what we're saying. Here, I'm appealing to things that my audience might care about. You might like spending time with your family, you might like playing video games, and I'm telling you that if you buy my argument that cats are easier, then you can have more time to do these other things. It supports the argument I'm making, and it also makes you care about what I'm talking about. In high school, I did an event called International Extemporaneous Speaking, which basically meant I was talking about boring international politics, and my judges, to be frank, often didn't care about what I was saying. It's important to use impacts that's going to make your judge appreciate what you're talking about. And that's how you draw people into topics that maybe you're really passionate about, but other people care less about than you do. If you remember these 3 steps to your argument, you're going to do a really good job of putting individual arguments together. But how do we actually form that into an essay? The next thing I want to talk about is how you structure your argumentative essay altogether. Down here, I've outlined something that I often find helpful. Even today, I make an outline before I write any essay. What I have here is a standard 5-paragraph essay, and I know I hate them too. But before you're really comfortable with writing arguments, it's important to get used to this type of style, because you're forcing yourself into a structure, much like the claim warrant impact does, that's going to make you more effective at communicating your thoughts. So we start off with a thesis statement. Thesis statements can be scary, and we'll probably have to talk more about them in another video. But essentially all this is the major argument you're making with your essay, or what your main point is. The structure of a thesis statement should look like this. The first thing you talk about is what your main argument is. And then you're going to say something like evidenced by or proven by, and then talk about the different arguments that you're going to make. So this claim that I have over here, cats are easier to take care of than dogs, is probably one of my individual paragraphs. It's not my essay as a whole. My essay might be something like, you should choose to get a cat rather than a dog because cats are easier to take care of than dogs, whatever your second argument is, and whatever your third argument is. Your thesis statement is a way your reader can summarily understand everything you're about to talk about in your essay. And it's really important for you to have that ready because it's easier to write your essay once you know what your different claims are. So each of these different paragraphs are going to be their own claim, their own warrant or warrants, and their own impact or impacts. So you might want to say here, cats are easier to take care of than dogs. Maybe I have more than just one sentence explaining that though. I want to explain really well why I believe that's true. Maybe I even include some data, some pieces of evidence to back up that claim as well. Once you have each of these three arguments, then you want to bring them together with a conclusion that ties them all back to the overarching statement. This is where you can add some more impacts to convince your reader that this is really the thing that they should believe. It's also a place where it's helpful to consider some of the counter arguments that might be going against your side. So if I think that many people believe that dogs are cuter, that's something that's difficult to prove. Maybe it doesn't really belong in an essay, but it could be a good counter argument. The important thing about counter arguments when you bring them up is you absolutely need to be able to prove why they're wrong. You do not want to bring up an argument for the other side if you're not confident that you can beat that argument. The one exception is if the audience is obviously going to be thinking it, and then you just need to do your best to fight back against it. If you think there's an obvious argument against what you're trying to say, you need to address it in your essay, or your audience is going to be thinking it the whole time, and you're never going to have a chance to fight back against that obvious claim. So this is a good spot to do that type of thing in your conclusion. If there are a lot of counter arguments or one that you want to spend a lot of time on, it could even be worth using one of your paragraphs to talk about the counter arguments. But once again, only do that if you're going to do a really convincing job of telling your audience why the counter arguments are wrong, and if you think they're really important to address in the first place. I know this can be complicated, complex, and scary when you first do it, but all I can say is the more you practice writing this way, the easier it becomes. I did debate for about 8 years, and I can tell you that it's the number one thing that's made me more effective as a writer, and it's because I have to practice this style so frequently. So the more you practice, the better you are going to become. And remember, always include other things that Mrs. Boyd has taught you about in these essays. Use personification, use metaphors, use analogies, use these other things you're learning because it's going to make your argument more engaging. You don't want to be boring. You want your audience to keep caring, and so use things that they're going to be able to relate to and care about. It will make your writing better, and it will make your audience happier too.